So, hello and officially welcome to Risk Management and Surety Bonds Learning Lab Preview. Presenting today, we have Kirk Buffington. Some of you are excited. You're already messaging him in the chat saying hi. If anytime during the webinar you need any technical assistance, please send me, Jeff, a direct message. Otherwise, keep the chat selected to everyone. That way everyone can see the things that you are commenting on, the questions that you'd like help with. But if you have specific questions for Kirk, he's going to answer them at the end of today's session. And it'll be easiest for Kirk to see those questions if you use the Q&A box instead of the chat feature. So the Q&A box is the way to get your questions answered today. I think we're ready to get started. Kirk, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And welcome to everybody who has joined this introduction to the newest NIGP Learning Lab series, which is Risk Management and Surety Bonds. So why are we doing this? We have seen, NIGP and myself, over the last 2 years at Forum in August, I have done a presentation on surety bonds. I call it bonding, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's had great participation at both of the last two forums. Last year, in fact, in Louisville, we were pretty much at standing room only. So after last year, NIGP, education folks, and myself started talking about, there's such an interest in this topic. Perhaps we can put together a learning lab. Now, I'll be honest with all of you. This is my first foray into creating a learning lab series, but I'm very excited about this topic. I became excited about it while I was completing my master's in legal studies program, and we had a couple of sessions, a couple of courses in risk management and how important it is to any organization, not just a government organization, but any organization that is faced with the tremendous amount of risks that we all face. So that's how we kind of got to this point. I have built the content for the 6 sessions, and today we are going to go through a very high overview of what each session is going to talk about. So with that said, let me move on. If I can get my slide deck to move. That's always a challenge. Okay, so just real briefly, these are the dates for the 6 labs. Each lab is 2 hours. My general plan is to present the content in roughly 90 minutes, somewhere 75 to 90 minutes, and try to always allow for 25, 30 minutes of Q&A at the end of each learning lab. So again, these are the dates. You can find these on the website. And of course, there's a link for registration. And I really look forward to seeing, hopefully, those of you that are with us today enrolled for the labs. So again, we are going to concentrate on different parts of risk management and bonds. The first 3 sessions will be more about risk management. And yes, we have a risk management competency certificate that touches the surface, but I intend to take it a little deeper and have a holistic discussion about what's called enterprise risk management, and looking at how procurement can work very closely with risk management to cover all the risks that may be faced by an organization. What I've also found is that there are many procurement folks out there that work at agencies that do not even have a full-time risk manager. In many cases, the risk manager is also the human resources director, or in a couple of cases that I've become familiar with, the risk manager is also the clerk of the city. So while those folks may be proficient in risk management specific to their agency, they don't understand it as a profession. That is not their first mission in working at the city. So I believe it's important to try to bring procurement into a greater understanding of how risk management and procurement can work together. There's obviously been a tremendous amount of change to public procurement post-pandemic, not just the supply chain issues, but delivery restrictions, delivery limitations, the kinds of things that have become even more of a potential risk to any buyer when they issue a contract, they issue the purchase order. What are the risks involved in getting that delivery of goods or services? So one of the questions that we will try to answer over the 6 weeks is how can risk identification be effectively integrated into the public sector procurement process? And this comes from, again, what I talk about, the holistic approach, okay? Working hand in hand with risk management on a daily basis, not just in the contractual clauses. And that's what I think a lot of us have seen as being our role in risk management, is just attempting to have the right clauses in the contract. And enterprise risk management goes way beyond that discussion. We'll talk a lot about SWOT analysis and how important it is to have a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I don't suggest that we should do a SWOT analysis for every single solicitation that we put out to bid, but those that present risks, higher risks, such as, high value, high profile, those types of solicitations, there should be a full-blown SWOT analysis done with all the stakeholders to identify every potential risk. And every solicitation that we do has different risks. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all when it comes to risk management, because the risks that may be inherent in soliciting for temporary labor is totally different than the risk that may be present when we're soliciting for a new ERP, an enterprise resource planning module, software module for your financial system. So the idea of SWOT analysis and the idea of the holistic approach to identifying risk and mitigating it as much as possible. And ultimately, risk analysis leads to risk mitigation. And how do we mitigate for the different risks that we've identified? So generally, in procurement, the areas of risk that we identify are both strategic and operational. Now, if you think back to when you've ever had a class or a discussion about strategic planning, the question is always asked, what is the difference between strategic planning and tactical planning? Well, tactical or operational planning is that current fiscal year. Okay, so the risks that may be inherent, if you've done your SWOT analysis, what are the risks? Are those risks operational, potentially occurring in the current fiscal year? Or are they strategic, potentially occurring in the 3 to 5 year range? So again, if you're doing any procurement that is going to result in a more than 1 year contract, then you have strategic risk that you have to address. Okay? We as agency procurements have to consider and address the risks in those ways. Are they short-term, current fiscal year, or are they strategic? What's going to happen to that contract for temporary labor in 3 years when it comes up for renewal? What's the marketplace going to look like? What's the pricing structure going to look like? Those are the kinds of questions that should be asked in the beginning while you're doing your SWOT analysis, so that you can have those in place, have the mitigation strategies in place prior to that 3-year term coming up. So what we like to say in risk management when we're talking about ERM, enterprise risk management, is that risk assessment process, that holistic approach, prepares us to mitigate and allocate the risk. Okay, now by allocation, it's a determination of who is responsible for a particular type of risk. So risk assessment and mitigation, all right? Those are the topics that we will address in the second Learning Lab series. These are just three of the risks that we are currently probably experiencing almost on a daily basis. Poor performance, delays, disputes, okay? How are you going to mitigate those? How are you going to assess those and then mitigate those? The failure of us to develop that risk plan during our SWOT analysis may very well result in failures on both us as the agency and as the owners, and on the contractor or on the supplier, okay? Jeff, I believe this may be a good time to pull up that first polling question that I have. So when we talk about surety bonds, is a surety agreement, is a surety bond a two-party agreement? True or false? A surety bond is a two-party agreement.
Results are coming in. About 55% have participated so far. We'll give it just another 20 seconds.
Okay.
I forgot to start counting backwards. We'll just say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
There you go.
and here's the results.
Okay, so unfortunately, a surety bond agreement is actually a three-party agreement, okay? Because you have the agency, the owner, who is the obligor, you have the contractor, and then you have the surety. So they are actually three-party agreements. And we as the owner, the agency, we are due the obligations of the contractor. And if the contractor fails, then the surety has to step up and obviously take care of what has not been completed on the contract. So those are one of the things. That's just one of the many things that we will discuss about surety bonds and their relationship between agencies, contractor, and the surety. So let's take a look at Lab 1. All right, this is where I will really go into depth on what is enterprise risk management, ERM. It developed as a result of some of the financial crises that occurred in the late 80s, early 90s, Enron, WorldCom, and some other examples where the organizations were not managing risk appropriately, okay? So the concept of the entire organization being part of the risk management plan, because everybody in the organization has a hand in seeing risk, identifying risk, and then mitigating that risk, okay? Every single person in your agency has a responsibility, I believe, to identify risk and in some manner figure out how to mitigate it. Now, that may be just simply sending an email to the risk manager or whoever is providing risk management services. But it's every single person. I mean, if you walk into your city hall, and let's take procurement out of the example. Let's say one of your IT folks walks into City Hall and they notice that there's a broken step. All right. So that person has two choices. They can, obviously step around the broken step and then just forget about it and go on into work. Or they identify it and they get a hold of somebody to fix the broken step before you are faced with a lawsuit, before your agency is faced with a lawsuit because of a trip and fall. Now, part of my experience in risk management comes from my time as director of finance at the city of Fort Lauderdale. And one of my duties was to serve on the risk committee, the risk assessment committee. And we met on a monthly basis, and most of the meeting was about lawsuits that have been filed against the city. And we got a tremendous number of trip and falls, even though in large part, the city isn't responsible for a lot of areas where people may trip and fall. But a lot of attorneys, well, you're in the city of Fort Lauderdale, you took a spill in Fort Lauderdale, so we're going to sue the city. We have to answer all of those suits, obviously. But had the IT person, or had the person who first in the morning saw that broken step, had they taken the time to send an email or approach whoever might have been responsible, that lawsuit could have been avoided. So that is the concept of enterprise risk management. It is the concept of no silos, okay? That's been a big buzzword for the last several years, even before I retired from full-time employment. Does the organization exist in silos, or are there no silos? And unfortunately, I think, to a large extent, a lot of us, public or private, there are silos. We are, we have blinders on in our workday as to we have responsibilities for X, and we don't have the time to worry about Y. Okay, so those are just some of the things. We will talk about organizational risk. We will talk about the 6 categories of risk. Okay, so Lab 1 is really an overview of enterprise risk management and what it means to an organization. Risk assessment and mitigation. How does maintaining a comprehensive risk register contribute to the overall effectiveness of risk management? And we will learn in the second lab series about the risk register and how that can be built organizationally, again, in that holistic kind of approach, and how those risk registers can be built organizationally so that everybody has the knowledge of the risks that the agency is facing and how the agency is going to mitigate or treat each of those risks. Okay. Jeff, if you could bring up that second polling question.
Poll has been launched.
And if you don't have a lot of accounting background, this may be an unfamiliar type of question to you. But again, this will be one of those things that we will learn in, I think, Lab 3, Learning Lab 3.
Take another 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Okay. A bank's letter of credit, the difference is between the bond and a bank's letter of credit is the letter of credit will tie up cash for the contractor. That will be identified in the financial statements as a liability. Okay, so that affects the cash flow of the contractor. So the surety bond, conversely, doesn't affect the financial statement or the financial strength of a contractor at all. There's no collateral involved. There's no cash involved. So the bond or the security that is presented and represented by a bond is a much better security than a bank's letter of credit, because that bank's letter of credit is now going to tie up cash or collateral for that contractor. And that could put that contractor in a difficult position if they're in a cash flow crunch and they can't pay their suppliers, they can't pay their subcontractors. So it puts them in a difficult position. I advocate that a bond, a surety bond, is the best and only security for both bid and performance that agencies should accept. Because a letter of credit isn't going to get the project completed if the contractor fails. You may get the cash represented by the letter of credit, and let's say it's 50% of the contract value. And the contractor is only finished 45% or 40%. That leaves you with two huge challenges. One, how do you finish the project? Two, where are you going to get the rest of the cash to finish it? Okay. Plus, you have warranty issues. So that's a good thing to remember. And I know many agencies are tasked or are allowed to accept different forms of security. And I think through this Learning Lab series, particularly 3 and 4, you'll learn why the best option is the surety bond. Thank you, Jeff. All right, Lab 2, insurance regulation. Now, this may be a topic that you kind of think to yourself, well, why do I need to worry about insurance? Why do I need to know about insurance regulation as a procurement agent, as a purchasing agent, as a director of purchasing? Insurance is so critical, both in our professional life and our personal life, that I think it's a topic that I can at least bring some understanding to all of you. It's a very complicated regulatory system, all right, because the states have primary obligation for controlling the insurance market in each particular state. But the feds also have a handle in regulation of insurance. So having an understanding of the differences between what the state has obligations to do and what the feds have obligations to do, I think will give you a better handle of risk management in general. Plus, we'll talk about insolvency and what happens if your insurance provider goes under. The insurance regulator in your state hasn't done the appropriate review and analysis of a particular insurance company, and they go under. Okay, and you're left there with a claim on your risk, on your insurance. We are very involved in the insurance market in that we generally will compete our health insurance, our third-party workman's comp administration, other insurances that may be required by your particular agency. We are responsible in most cases for competing those. And because of that, I think it's important that we have an understanding of how the insurance market works. This is why, in the context of public sector procurement, we're going to learn what mechanisms can be implemented to better monitor and review those risks that you identified in that initial SWOT analysis. Okay, you've done your SWOT analysis, you've released your competitive process, you've awarded your contract, but what are the mechanisms that we can use to monitor those identified risks? Okay, and that's very important. Jeff, let's do that last polling question if we could. Is a surety bond the same as insurance?
Five, four, three, two, and one.
Most of you got that right. A surety bond is not the same as insurance. Insurance pays you a lump sum payment, whatever it is, $100,000, $500,000. That's your payment. You still have the responsibility to take that funding and get the and complete the project. Okay. Whereas a bond, the surety is obligated to finish that project for you at whatever it, at the same contract cost that was awarded and complete the project. So well done. All right, so lab 3 is risk analysis and treatment of risk. This is the meat of enterprise risk management, okay? And we'll talk about what's the definition of risk. How does that work in the objectives of ERM, the enterprise risk management? We'll learn that there are 4 steps in creating that enterprise risk management plan, okay? We'll talk extensively about the types of risks that we face as the contracting authority, okay? And finally, what are the techniques for managing risk? We'll learn about some of the treatments that agencies can choose. There are always choices. But the number one thing to remember, because risk is about shifting risk, allocating risk, the more risk we shift to other parties, primarily our contractor, the more expensive our contract is going to be. Okay, and that is one of the big takeaways from Lab 3, is an understanding of the more risk we shift, the more it's going to cost us, and there has to be shared risk. Okay, I liken the idea of shared risk to the idea of a win-win in negotiations. Under the win-win concept in negotiations, both parties walk away having achieved some important wins, but they didn't win everything, okay? Because if for one party to win everything, the other party has to lose everything. And then that does not make for a good contractual relationship. So just as we give up a few things and we take away a few things in our negotiations, the same is true of risk sharing. We have to share the risk with our partners. And I think today, even more so than pre-pandemic, we have to be in collaborative types of relationships with our suppliers. So lab 4 is when we'll get into an introduction to bonds. We'll talk about bond definitions. We'll talk about some other bonds besides bid and payment and performance bonds. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about the difference between bonds and insurance. We'll talk how important bonding capacity is, okay? And we're going to start in lab 4, we're going to start looking at things from both the contractor's side and from the surety side. As I will hope to give you an understanding of what the other parties are looking at and the other parties are concerned about. Again, if we're going to be in a collaborative type of relationship, we need to understand their point of view. Okay, so that's really what I'm trying to do when we get into lab 4. Bonding capacity refers to the capacity of the contractor to take on more contractual work. Okay, there are actually 5 different types of bonds. Again, we talk about the payment, performance, and bid, but there are a couple of other bonds like the maintenance bond. We'll talk a little bit more about. We'll talk a little bit about construction liens, whether or not what happens if a project is lien. Now, in most states, public projects cannot be liened, but there are other ways around that for the contractor. And as you all know, I love case law. So we'll also look at some relevant case law regarding bonds and their enforcement. In lab 5, we're going to take a deeper dive. Again, I think this part of my learning lab is really where I try to spend a lot of time and hoping to help you all understand bid spreads, what that means and what that can mean when it comes to your bid security. What are the bond alternatives? We talked a little bit about letter of credit. There are others. Are they ever going to be good? There are times where you are probably going to have to accept them. And how do you mitigate the risk of accepting a letter of credit, because that does bring inherent risk with it. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about bond rates. What does it cost? What is the real cost of a bond to you as the agency owner? Potential claims. We'll talk a little bit about what's called surety consent, which is a topic that most of you, including myself, until I took some of these courses in my master's program, didn't even understand what that was. But having an understanding of surety consent can help you understand what may not be a good thing as part of a bond that's been given to you. And then again, we'll talk a little bit more about maintenance bonds and the warranty period. And then lab 6, we're going to talk about underwriting and how underwriting occurs. All right. Full personal indemnity on the part of the owner and the contractor. And then we'll have a final wrap up. Okay. Most of lab 6 will probably be spent in trying to answer questions that may have come up through the previous 5 sessions. Okay. And that brings us to any questions today. I've really enjoyed giving you this brief overview of what this Learning Lab series is going to be about. And I hope to see you in these sessions. Looks like we have one. All right. Can't the public organization protect itself because you can't sue the king or the government? Well, you're referring to the sovereignty of the government. And while the government is sovereign, they can still be sued. Personal liability in particular provides a lot of opportunity for the government to be sued. And again, if you do not perform in the contractual relationship between you and a supplier, if you fail to do your part, if you fail to perform, you can be sued for contract breach. So there are protections, but you should not assume that because you're a government, you can't be sued. Because we can be, and we can be found liable for losses that may occur or for contract breach. Any other questions?
The question in the chat from Christine Miller, she asks, are you able to pick and choose which lab to take, or do you require all labs to be taken?
That's a question for you, Jeff, because I'm not sure what the rules are on that.
Noted. And I do not have the answer at this moment, Christine, but I will look for that answer for you. Christine, if you send me a direct message in here with your email address, I'll respond as soon as I find an answer.
I see a response from Heather, able to pick and choose, and I think that is the case. So, well,
there we go.
I think that's the answer. You can pick and choose either any or all. Thank you, Carrie. Good to at least hear from you here. Okay. Well, if there are not any other questions, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, any final comments? It does not look like, unless we're typing out some really long, complicated questions.
Is there I'm not sure what that cost. Oh, is there a cost? Yes, there is, and that's on the website where you register. And I'm honestly not sure what the cost is for each lab, but yes, there is a cost. That one I can't answer.
Heather Knight is coming through with all the the quality answers here. Thank you, Heather. Kathleen, here we go. Heather, you're hired. And I'm fired. And Audrey Smith added a question in the Q&A. What were the 4 risk quadrants again, please?
Let's see. Let me just go back to that slide if I can. Here you go. I think you're referring to these. And we'll obviously talk in greater detail in the Learning Lab about each type of risk that may be hazard, financial, operational, or strategic. Are there tests or exams? Not in the sense of when you take one of the pathways courses. There probably will be and Jeff, again, there's probably a survey at the end of the Learning Labs, but I haven't prepared any tests or exams. Let me answer it to you that way.
Well, not seeing any additional questions. As soon as I start speaking, one comes in, but it wasn't a question. It was a thank you to you, Kirk. Any final words, Kirk, before? Oh,
No.
and Kathleen did have another question in the
Okay.
Q&A. We discuss penalty versus liquidated damages.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I should have mentioned that's part of the deeper dive into bonds at Lab 5. We'll talk about, in fact, I have some case law regarding liquidated damages and how they can't be considered penalties, they can't be punitive. So great question, and yes, that will definitely be included.
Well, Kirk, if you have no final comments, no additional questions are coming in, so we can say thank you for your time and effort, energy, and thank you all for being here today and asking the questions to provide
Thank you.
answers for everybody.
I look forward to
Thank you
seeing
all.
some of you or all of you in one or all of the labs. So thank you all for your attention.
Make it a great day, everyone.
Thank you.